Chris Bliss.
Thanks a lot, Kent. Thank you all for coming out here this afternoon. I'm actually doing a serious talk about comedy. It'll be funny, but it'll also be serious. I was kind of debating beforehand whether to open with comedy or not open with comedy. Some people are scared of the whole idea of comedy, and so I should reassure you that even though I will be mentioning some point of view subjects that you may disagree with politically, I won't be using any language or subject matter that isn't commonly heard on the playgrounds at the public schools. So now to the topic at hand. Some of you have seen this quote up here, wondering why it's here. It's here because Gabriel Garcia Marquez is one of my favorite writers. For his storytelling, but also for the beauty and precision of his language, whether it's this opening line from 100 Years of Solitude or the fantastical stream of consciousness of Autumn of the Patriarch, where the words rush by page after page after page of unpunctuated imagery, just sweeping the reader along like some wild river twisting through a primal South American jungle. Reading Marquez is a visceral experience, which struck me as particularly remarkable during one session with the novel, when I realized that I was being swept along on this incredibly vivid journey in translation. Now, I was a comparative literature major back at college, which is like an English major, only instead of being stuck with Chaucer for 3 months, we got to read great works of literature in translation from all over the planet. And as great as the books were and as great as these writers were, you could always tell that you weren't getting anything close to the full effect. But not so with Marquez, who once praised his translators' versions as being better than his own, which is an astonishing compliment. So when I found out that his translator, Gregory Rabassa, had written his own book on that subject, I couldn't wait to get it. It's called If This Be Treason. It's a charming read. I highly recommend it for anyone out here who might be interested in the translator's art. But the reason I mention it this afternoon is that early on, Rabassa offers this elegantly simple insight. Now, as often as every person in this room has run into that language barrier, somebody not hearing remotely what you think that you're saying, I don't think that I have ever seen the inherent challenge of communication in so crystalline a light. And that's my topic for today, communication. Specifically, what 25 years of doing stand-up comedy has shown me about how people do and don't communicate successfully. In a world that with each passing day challenges all of us to be more willing and able to accept and share changing perspectives. Now, it turns out that stand-up is uniquely suited to this challenge, to illuminate this challenge, because for starters, comedians experience the transmission, reception, response loop with far more immediacy than most people do. I mean, there you are, alone on a stage, in real time with no filters, in front of a room full of strangers, trying out your ideas that looked really funny on the page. And there you are in that environment where feedback is instant and intimate. Now, in fairness, the people who've come to watch this presentation, they want you to succeed. After all, they've all come out that night, they want to have a good time. But both they and the comedian understand the stakes and understand who's going to get the final say on how the evening turns out. In other words, the audience at a comedy club brings both willingness and judgment to the table, which is really the same dynamic that's at work in most of our important interpersonal communications. The only real difference for comedians is that there are a lot more witnesses when things start to go sideways. Because there's really no graceful way for you to exit the stage after you've taken an audience from this.
Of course, in California, they told us the lottery was going to save our schools, and it's done a great job. Johnny still can't read, but he can pick 6 now.
And then 15 minutes later, you're at this. And then by the end of your set, now, if nothing else, that kind of experience focuses the mind, and for the comedian, that leads to the first important lesson of comedy as communication, which is that success and failure is not primarily about the words. The words matter, of course, but what matters most is what I call conscious connectivity. And by that, I mean connectivity in both directions, outwardly in connecting and staying connected with your audience, but also inwardly in striving to achieve a conscious, layered, and effortless connection to the full scope of whatever it is that you're presenting. Not just how each piece fits into the overall narrative, but also by making a moment-by-moment commitment to infuse the material with every aspect of why you thought it was funny to begin with. Everything from the cultural context to your own personal emotional subtext. Now, whenever I start mapping out a new piece of material about some news story or some political or cultural issue, it's usually because my comedic spidey senses are telling me that something important has been left out of this discussion. So I start the process by trying to figure out what are the questions that are being asked and what are the questions that aren't being asked. And I actually came up with this approach after watching an interview with Dr. Jonas Salk, the developer of the first polio vaccine, where he was asked if there would ever be a cure for AIDS. And he answered without hesitation, oh yes, there already is. It pre-exists within the virus. We just need to find the right questions. Now, of course, I realize comedy is not on a par with something like curing AIDS, but well-crafted, thoughtful material, like any very committed communication, can help us overcome our areas of our ignorance, as long as it helps us find those right questions. And by right questions, I don't mean in the classic propaganda sense of setting frames for the debate. This is something I want to be really clear about, because to a whole lot of people, a successful communication is one where they win the argument. And so they structure their premises accordingly, and the result is a highly self-limited, mostly one-way conversation that even when it succeeds, it fails because it's designed to limit discovery. That's not the kind of comedy or communication that I'm interested in.